I still remember that afternoon. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it settles in your heart. I sat by the window, watching the sunlight fade through the curtains, and I thought about how strange life can be. One day you're the center of your children's world, and the next, you're just there. Present, but invisible. My son, Daniel, used to come home and tell me everything. How school went, what he ate, who teased him, which teacher made him laugh. I would sit, listening, smiling, feeling like the luckiest mother in the world, but that day, when he looked me in the eye and said, "You're just being dramatic," something inside me quietly broke. It wasn't the words, really. It was the way he said them, flat, dismissive, like my feelings didn't matter anymore. Like the years I had spent wiping his tears, sewing his uniforms, and whispering prayers for his safety had somehow expired. I wanted to say something back, but my voice got lost somewhere deep inside. So, I just stayed silent. He walked away, frustrated. I could hear his footsteps fading down the hall, the door closing, and the car engine starting outside, and I sat there. With that silence again. You see, silence used to be my friend. In the early years, when the kids were small, silence meant peace, that they were asleep, safe, dreaming. But now, silence had a different meaning. It meant distance. It meant they had learned to live without me. That evening, I made tea like I always did. 2 cups. One for me, one for him. I don't know why, maybe out of habit, or maybe out of hope. When he didn't come back, I poured his cup down the sink. The steam vanished in an instant, and somehow, that felt symbolic, like everything I had once poured my heart into was just gone in a puff of air. As I sat back down, I told myself not to cry. Mothers always tell themselves that. We hide our pain behind folded laundry and clean dishes, thinking it makes us strong, but that night, as I sat alone, I realized something. Sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes, silence is the sound of a heart breaking quietly, so no one else has to hear it. When people ask me what happiness looks like, I think of mornings filled with laughter. The smell of pancakes, the sound of my children running around the kitchen, my husband teasing me about making the tea too strong. Those were the moments that made me feel alive. Our little house was always full of noise. Toys scattered across the floor, Daniel shouting that his sister took his pencil. My daughter, Emily, giggling behind the couch. It was chaos. Yes, but it was our kind of chaos back then. I thought those days would last forever. I never imagined a time when the breakfast table would be empty, or that I would eat alone. Daniel was my firstborn, quiet, thoughtful, a boy who felt things deeply but rarely said much. He used to hold my hand while watching cartoons, even when he was too old for it. Sometimes, I'd look at his small fingers in mine and wonder how I got so lucky. Emily, on the other hand, was a storm, all energy, all heart. She filled every room she entered. She would climb into my lap, rest her head on my shoulder, and say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll never leave you." I'd laugh, knowing children say such things without realizing how life changes. But still, I believed her. Maybe because I wanted to. My husband, David, was a quiet man, hardworking, kind, and patient. He wasn't one for big words or long talks, but when he smiled at me, I felt safe. Together, we built a life. Not a perfect one, but one full of love. We didn't have much money, but we had time. We had stories at bedtime, family dinners, and long walks in the park on Sundays. But as years passed, life started to speed up. David got promoted at work and spent longer hours away. Daniel entered high school and started pulling away too, not out of anger, but because he was growing, changing, trying to understand himself. Emily became busy with friends, homework, and dreams that stretched far beyond our small home. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself, this is how it's supposed to be. Children grow, they find their wings. A mother's job is to let them, but I never realized how quiet the house would become once they flew. The first time Daniel forgot to call on my birthday, I brushed it off. He was in college, busy with classes, I told myself. Then it happened again, and again. Each time, the silence after the phone that didn't ring grew heavier. I'd sit by the window, watching the road outside, hoping to see his car, even though I knew he wasn't coming. David would notice my eyes lingering too long at the door. "He'll call, honey," he'd say softly. And I'd nod, smiling like I believed it. Emily still called, at least for a while. She'd tell me about her job, her friends, how expensive rent was. But as the years went by, her calls too became shorter, less frequent, more formal. "Mama, I'll call you next week, okay?" she'd say. And sometimes, that next week wouldn't come for months. After David passed away, the silence in the house became unbearable. Grief has a strange way of magnifying loneliness. I'd wake up at night reaching for his hand, only to find cold sheets. In those quiet hours, I started thinking about the past more often, not because I wanted to, but because memories were all I had left that still felt real. Daniel came for the funeral. He was polite, distant, his face tired from work and life. He hugged me, but it felt like a gesture, something he thought he should do, not something he wanted to. When everyone else had left, I found him standing outside, checking his phone. I wanted to tell him how much I missed him. How empty the house felt without his laughter. But before I could, he said, "Mom, don't make this harder than it already is." That was the first time he made me feel like a burden. And that's when I learned that love doesn't always fade in big, dramatic ways. Sometimes, it just quietly slips away in small, unnoticed moments. After the funeral, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe he'd visit more, maybe Emily would too. But months passed, and the visits became rare again. I filled my days with little routines, cleaning the same corners, watering the same plants, baking bread for no one. I'd turn on the TV for background noise, just so the silence wouldn't feel so loud. Sometimes I'd talk to David's photograph. I'd say, "Do you think they'll come this Sunday?" And in the stillness of that room, I almost imagined him saying, "Maybe next week." But next week rarely came. Then one day, Daniel called. His voice sounded distant, mechanical. "Mom, I might drop by tomorrow," he said. My heart leaped, even though I tried to hide it. When he arrived, I made all his favorite dishes: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. I waited by the window like a girl waiting for her first love. When he finally walked in, I noticed something different about him. His tone, his body language, the way he scanned the house. It wasn't home to him anymore. He barely touched the food. He talked mostly about his job, his apartment, and how stressful things were. I listened quietly, nodding, adding small comments here and there. But he never once asked how I was doing. And then, just before leaving, he said, "Mom, you really need to stop being so emotional about everything. You're just being dramatic." He said it so casually, like it was nothing. But to me, it was everything. That sentence became a mirror, reflecting all the years of love, sacrifice, and silence that had gone unnoticed. When he left that day, I didn't cry. I simply sat down in the same chair where I had once read him bedtime stories, and I whispered to myself, "I guess this is what it feels like when your children grow up and forget who you were before you became their mother." After that visit, something inside me changed. I didn't say it aloud, but I stopped expecting calls. I stopped counting days on the calendar, waiting for their visits. It's strange how expectation itself can be heavy. When you let go of it, life becomes quieter, lighter, but not happier. Each morning, I'd wake up to the same routine. Make tea. Fold the blanket. Open the curtains. Some mornings, sunlight would pour into the room, warm and golden. Other mornings, the clouds would linger, and I'd wonder if the weather somehow knew how I felt. I tried to stay busy. I joined a local women's group at church. We'd meet twice a week to knit, talk, and sometimes just sit together. There was comfort in shared silence, the kind that didn't hurt. But even there, when the other women talked about their children, "My daughter's visiting this weekend. My son just sent me pictures of the grandkids," I would smile politely and sip my tea. No one noticed the pause that followed. My smile, the part where I had nothing to add. I didn't want pity. I just wanted presence. Daniel rarely called. When he did, it was short. Practical. "Mom, I sent you some money, did you get it?" "Yes, thank you, dear." "Okay. I'll talk to you later." It was strange. He sent money, but not himself. Emily called sometimes, too. She had a new job, a new life, a new city. "Mom, I'm so busy," she'd say, her voice rushed. And I'd say, "It's all right, sweetheart. I understand." But inside, I wanted to tell her that I didn't want her time, I just wanted her. One Sunday afternoon, I baked cookies, just like I used to when they were kids. The smell filled the house. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days. Then I realized I had no one to share them with. I packed some in a small tin and took them to the neighbors. They were kind, grateful, but as I walked back home, the silence followed me again, faithful, familiar. That evening, I sat by the old family photo album. Page after page, I saw their faces: Daniel with his missing front teeth, Emily with frosting on her nose, David smiling behind them. The pictures didn't age. Only I did. Sometimes, I would whisper to those photos, "Do you remember this day? You were so happy. You said you'd never leave me." But the photos never answered. One night, I decided to write Daniel a letter. Not a long one, just a few lines. I wrote, "I miss you. I know you're busy, but I'd love to see you. The house feels empty without your laughter." I folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it near the phone. But I never sent it, because I realized that maybe he didn't need reminders. Maybe he already knew, and that hurt even more. A few weeks later, I got sick. It wasn't serious at first, just fatigue, a cold that lingered too long. The doctor told me to rest, but rest feels different when no one is around to notice. I didn't tell Daniel or Emily. I didn't want to sound dramatic. For a few days, I stayed in bed. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain outside and the clock ticking on the wall. Every tick reminded me of time passing, and of how, somewhere in the world, my children were living their lives without realizing that the person who once carried them in her arms now struggled to carry herself across the room. One evening, the phone rang. It was Daniel. He sounded stressed, as usual. "Mom, did you pay the electricity bill? I got a message about your account." "Yes, dear, I did." "Okay, good. I'll talk to you later." He hung up before I could even say, "I miss you." That night, I cried quietly. Not because of loneliness, but because I finally understood, love doesn't always fade from both sides at the same time. Sometimes, one heart still remembers long after the other has moved on and days turned into weeks. My strength came back slowly. I started walking outside again, just to feel the wind, to hear the birds. One afternoon, while walking, I passed a park where young mothers were playing with their children. A little boy ran up to his mother, holding a flower, shouting, "Mama! Look what I found." She bent down, smiled, hugged him, and for a second, my eyes filled with tears. I wasn't jealous, just nostalgic. I missed being needed. I missed being someone's world. That night, I sat down and thought about forgiveness. Not the kind we read about in books, the kind that makes everything suddenly better, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you realize holding on to pain doesn't change anyone but yourself. I realized I could spend the rest of my life waiting for apologies that might never come. Or, I could learn to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Still, forgiveness isn't easy. It's not a single moment, it's a daily choice. Every morning, I'd wake up, make tea, and whisper to myself, "Let go, just a little more today." And slowly, it started to work, not completely, but enough. Enough to smile again at small things, the sound of birds, the smell of rain, the warmth of sunlight on the windowpane. Then one day, Emily called. "Mom," she said softly, "I might visit next month." I smiled, though my heart skipped a beat. "I'd love that, sweetheart." When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. I didn't cry this time. I just whispered, maybe this is how forgiveness starts, one small call at a time. Weeks passed. She didn't come that month, but somehow, I wasn't angry. Because for the first time, I understood, love doesn't always have to look like it used to. Sometimes, it changes shape, softens, finds new ways to exist, and maybe that was okay. One evening, I found an old note Daniel had written when he was 10. It said, "Mom, you're my best friend." The handwriting was uneven, messy, full of innocence. I held that note for a long time. I thought about the man he had become, tired, distant, grown, and I wondered if somewhere deep down, that little boy was still inside him. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered into the darkness, "Wherever you are, Daniel, I still love you. I always will." The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering without bitterness. So, I decided to start writing again, letters, journal entries, little notes of gratitude. Not to send to anyone, but to remind myself that love is still alive in me, and though the house remained quiet, it no longer felt empty. It was filled with memories, with echoes of laughter, and with the quiet strength that only a mother's heart can hold. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those quiet, ordinary days that don't promise anything special. The kind of day you don't expect your life to shift even a little. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea, when I heard a knock at the door. At first, I thought it must be the postman or maybe a neighbor. But when I opened the door, my heart froze. Daniel stood there. He looked different, older, tired. His eyes carried something I hadn't seen in years, hesitation. "Hi, Mom," he said, softly. For a moment, I just stared at him. I didn't know whether to cry or to smile. My mind wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why now? What happened? Are you okay? But my heart only said one thing: he's here. I stepped aside quietly. "Come in, Daniel." He walked in slowly, glancing around as if the house itself had changed. But it hadn't. It was exactly as he left it, neat, warm, filled with the faint smell of old wood and tea. He sat down at the kitchen table. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to smile. "Everything looks the same," he said. "Yes," I replied, my voice calm. "Some things don't need to change." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was cautious, fragile, like glass that could break with a single wrong word. Then he looked down and said quietly, "I don't even know where to start." I said, "Start anywhere." He sighed deeply. I didn't come here because I planned to. I came because I didn't know where else to go." I waited, my hands resting in my lap. "Things at work got bad," he continued. "I lost my job 2 weeks ago. I didn't tell anyone. I tried to handle it myself, but..." He stopped. His voice cracked. "It's been hard, Mom. Really hard. For the first time in years." I saw that same boy who once came running to me after falling off his bicycle, scared, ashamed, trying to be brave. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice trembling. "For everything. For being distant. For the things I said. I don't even know why I said them." I took a slow breath. My hands wanted to reach for his, but I stayed still, not out of pride, but because I wanted him to finish. He looked up at me. "When Dad died, I didn't know how to deal with it. I thought being strong meant not feeling anything. I kept pushing everything down, even you." My eyes softened. "Oh, Daniel." He shook his head. "And when you tried to talk to me, I told myself you were overreacting. That you were just lonely. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of needing anyone again." His words fell heavy in the air, honest and raw. I felt tears forming, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were the kind that come when walls finally begin to crumble. I whispered, "You're still my son. Nothing changes that." He nodded, his voice breaking. "I know. I just wish I'd realized that sooner." We sat in silence again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. Not the cold one that had filled the house for years, but a soft, healing one. After a while, I stood up and said, "Would you like some tea?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, please." As I moved around the kitchen, I caught his reflection in the window, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes softer. I realized how much time had passed, how much both of us had changed, and how forgiveness sometimes arrives not through words, but through small moments like this. When I placed the cup in front of him, he reached out and held my hand. "Thank you, Mom, for still being here." I didn't answer. I just squeezed his hand gently. We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing. About Dad. About his childhood. About how much he missed home, even though he never said it. As the afternoon light turned golden, he said, "Do you remember the time you stayed up all night sewing my costume for the school play?" I laughed softly. "The one that tore before you even reached the stage?" He smiled. "Yeah, that one." We both laughed, the kind of laugh that carries sadness and love at the same time. When evening came, he said he should go back to his apartment. But before leaving, he hesitated. "Can I come again tomorrow?" I looked at him, this grown man who once told me I was being dramatic, and said, "You never have to ask." When he left, I stood by the window watching his car disappear down the road. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me, not just relief, but peace. The next day, he came again. And the day after that, sometimes we didn't even talk much. He'd sit on the couch, working on his laptop, while I read or knitted nearby. It wasn't the same as before, but it didn't need to be. We were learning each other again, slowly, gently. One evening, as we sat together watching the rain, Daniel said, "Mom, I used to think you were lonely because you had no one around. But now I realize, you were lonely because no one was listening." I nodded, quietly. That's what silence feels like sometimes. He looked down, ashamed. I wish I had listened sooner. "You're here now," I said softly. "That's enough." He stayed the night that evening, just like he used to when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. The next morning, when I made breakfast, he was already at the table, smiling. "Mom," he said suddenly, "would it be alright if I stayed here for a while? Just until I figure things out?" I smiled. "Daniel, this house has always been your home. You just forgot the way for a little while." Over the next few weeks, the house slowly filled with life again. We cooked together, talked, shared memories. He even fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping for months. Sometimes, I'd find him sitting in the garden, lost in thought. When I asked what he was thinking, he'd say, "About Dad. About how fast life moves. About how easy it is to lose the people who matter." I never pushed for more. I just listened, and one evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange and gold, he said, "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at him and smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Daniel. It's something you're given because love refuses to die." He didn't speak after that. He just leaned over and hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to when he was little. And I realized then that sometimes, healing doesn't come with words. It comes with a heartbeat pressed against yours, saying, "I remember now." I'm home. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet house. But the silence was different now, warm, not hollow. It hummed softly with gratitude. I thought about all the years I had spent waiting, hurting, forgiving in silence. And I realized something important. Sometimes, life takes the long way back to love, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't look grand or dramatic. It looks like a knock on the door on an ordinary Tuesday morning. After Daniel's visit that day, something inside me changed. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, like a soft sunrise that takes its time to touch the corners of a dark sky. I had spent months waiting for his apology, for that moment when he would look into my eyes and finally see the mother who never stopped loving him. But that moment never came. Instead, what came was peace. Not the kind of peace that feels easy or light, but the kind that grows quietly after a storm, when you're too tired to cry and too wise to fight anymore. I started spending my days differently. I'd wake up early, open all the curtains, and let the morning light fill the house. I would make myself tea and sit by the window, the same one I used to stare out of in silence. But now, I looked at it differently. The world outside was still the same, the trees, the road, the sound of children walking to school. The only difference was me. I had stopped waiting. You see, that's something mothers do a lot. We wait. We wait for our children to call, to visit, to remember us. We wait for apologies that never come. We wait for love to sound the way it used to. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting. When I stopped waiting, I started living again. I went through old photographs, not to feel sad, but to remember that those moments were real. I had been loved once, deeply and honestly. Even if that love had faded, it had existed, and that was enough. I began volunteering at a small women's center nearby. Every Thursday, I would teach simple cooking lessons to young mothers. At first, it felt strange. I wasn't sure if I had anything left to give. But then I saw how they smiled when I shared a small story, or when I told them a recipe my own mother used to make. I realized I was still needed, just not in the way I expected. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up after the class, one of the young women stayed behind. She said softly, "Ma'am, you remind me of my mother. I haven't spoken to her in years." I smiled, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then I told her, "Call her. Don't wait too long. Sometimes we think there's time, but time moves quietly, and before we know it, the chance is gone." She nodded, with tears in her eyes. That night, I went home and cried too. Not out of sadness, but because I realized that even my pain had a purpose. It had made me softer, wiser. More patient with the world. Weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was quiet, like he was trying not to break. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry I haven't been around. Things have been a lot lately." I listened, my heart both aching and relieved. I didn't say, "It's okay," right away, because it wasn't. But I did say something truer. I said, "I know, Daniel. Life happens. But I never stopped loving you." There was silence. Not the heavy kind, not the painful one, just silence that felt like healing. And then he said, "I miss you." That was all I needed. Not a long apology, not explanations, just those 3 words. He came by the next day. He looked older, more tired, like life had been teaching him its own lessons. When he stepped inside, he hesitated, maybe because he didn't know what to expect. But I smiled and said, "The kettle's on. Tea?" And that broke the tension. We sat at the table, the same one where he used to do his homework. For a long time, we just talked about little things, work, the weather, the garden. But underneath all of it, there was something else, a quiet understanding that we were both learning how to start again. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You're really not angry, are you?" I shook my head. "No, Daniel. Anger takes too much space. I had to make room for peace instead." He smiled, a small, almost shy smile. And in that moment, I saw my little boy again. The same boy who used to hold my hand while crossing the street, who used to call me Mama in his sleep. I realized forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. It means looking at someone and seeing not what they did to you, but what they meant to you. Before everything went wrong, after that day, things didn't magically return to what they were. He didn't start visiting every week. He didn't call every night. But there was warmth again. A bridge had been rebuilt, small, fragile, but real. Sometimes he would send a message. Just saying, "Thinking of you, Mom." Sometimes, on Sundays, he would stop by for lunch, bring a small box of sweets, and tell me about his week. And each time he did, I thanked life silently. Because I knew, even small gestures, when done with love, can heal years of silence. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you give them, it's something you give yourself. It's how you let go of the weight that's been sitting on your heart, how you make space for sunlight to come in again. I used to think my silence was a sign of weakness. Now I know it was strength, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout or demand, but simply waits until love finds its way back home. So yes, when my son once said, "You're just being dramatic," I stayed silent. And now I understand why. Sometimes silence is not about giving up, it's about letting time do what words cannot, because in the end, love always finds its way back. Even through years of misunderstanding, distance, and hurt. Love has its own patience, it waits for the right moment to return. And when it does, it feels brand new again. That night, as I sat by the window again, I looked at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life. For teaching me that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. And that sometimes, being silent doesn't mean you have nothing to say, it simply means your heart is still learning how to speak softly. The older I grow, the more I understand that life isn't about what we lose, it's about what we learn while losing. There was a time when I thought forgiveness was something I gave to make others feel better. But now I know. It's what sets you free. For years, I carried a quiet ache, the kind that hides behind smiles and gentle nods. I thought love had forgotten me, that maybe I had failed as a mother. But love never leaves completely. It just changes its form. Sometimes it becomes distance, sometimes silence, and sometimes a memory that sits beside you while you drink your morning tea. When Daniel and I began speaking again, I didn't expect perfection. I didn't expect every wound to close instantly. I just wanted honesty, a little kindness, a little time. And that was enough. You see, forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a journey, one you take quietly, step by step, with your own heart. There will be days when you feel strong, and days when you ache again. But each day, the pain softens. Until one morning, you wake up and realize that the weight you once carried is gone. Last week, Daniel brought his daughter, my granddaughter, to visit. She ran into my arms, laughing, her small hands touching my face like she was memorizing it. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: continuity. The reminder that love, in all its forms, never truly ends. It just passes on, from one heart to another. We sat in the garden together, 3 generations, sipping tea, sharing laughter. And I thought to myself, this is what peace looks like. Not grand gestures, not apologies shouted into the sky. Just quiet presence. Just being there. Later that evening, as Daniel was leaving, he hugged me. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. But in that embrace, I felt everything he couldn't put into words, the regret, the gratitude, the love that had found its way back. I realized then. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had simply been waiting for the kind of love that takes time to grow up. Now, when I sit by the window, the silence feels different. It's no longer heavy, it's peaceful. I can hear the wind, the birds, the laughter from the street below. Life moving forward, gently, and I smile. Because I've learned that silence isn't the absence of love, sometimes, it's where love quietly begins again. If I could tell every mother one thing, it would be this: don't let your pain harden you. Let it soften you. Let it remind you that you loved deeply, that you gave more than anyone could ever see, and if your children forget for a while, let them. Love has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes years, because in the end, it's not the loudest voices that heal families, it's the softest ones. The ones that whisper forgiveness. The ones that say, I'm still here, even when the world has gone quiet. That's what silence taught me. That love, no matter how buried it seems, always listens. And sometimes, when words fail, silence speaks the truth we've been trying to say all along.